I'd worked as a cashier at the Walmart on Industrial Boulevard in Riverside for 3 years, and I thought I'd seen everything. Night shift weirdos, shoplifters, people trying to return obviously stolen merchandise. It was all part of the job. But what I discovered about my coworker Jenny Martinez on October 15, 2023, made me realize how little attention we paid to the people we work alongside every single day. Jenny had been hired about 6 months before this incident. She was quiet, efficient, always volunteered for extra shifts. Management loved her because she never called out sick and her register was always balanced perfectly. She worked lanes 12 and 13 most nights, right next to my usual spot at lane 14. We'd make small talk during slow periods, nothing deep, just complaints about difficult customers or weekend plans. The first thing that should have been a red flag was how Jenny never seemed to forget a customer. She'd see someone walk in and immediately know their usual purchase patterns. "Oh, Mrs. Peterson from Oak Street," she'd whisper to me. "She'll be buying the store-brand diapers and exactly 3 boxes of mac and cheese." And she was always right. I figured she just had a good memory for faces. Hell, after 3 years, I recognized plenty of regulars too. But Jenny's knowledge went deeper. She knew which customers paid with EBT, who used multiple credit cards for different purchases, who bought alcohol at specific times. She knew personal details that customers never shared, like which single mothers were dating again based on suddenly buying men's products, or which elderly customers were probably developing health issues based on their medication and food choices. The night everything changed started normal enough. It was a Tuesday around 11 p.m., dead quiet except for the overnight stockers restocking shelves. Jenny was helping a customer, an older man I'd seen before, maybe in his 60s, buying his usual frozen dinners and beer. Nothing unusual there. But after he left, I noticed Jenny quickly writing something in a small notebook she kept under her register. She'd done this before, but I'd never paid attention. This time, curiosity got the better of me. "What are you writing?" I asked during our break. Jenny looked up, startled. "Oh, just keeping track of inventory patterns. You know, from management." That explanation didn't sit right. Our inventory system was completely digital. Everything was tracked automatically through the barcode scanners. There was no reason for any cashier to manually track anything. About an hour later, Jenny went on her lunch break. I was covering both our lanes when I noticed she'd left her notebook behind. I know I shouldn't have looked, but something about her explanation nagged at me. I thought maybe she was tracking something legitimate that I didn't understand. I flipped it open and immediately felt sick. The first page had "Customer Profiles Lane 12/13" written at the top. Below that were detailed entries about regular customers, but not normal retail observations. These were invasive, personal profiles. Margaret Peterson, 42 Oak Street. Single mother, works at medical center, scrubs purchased weekly. Dating Mike Chin since September, confirmed by condom purchases and larger food quantities. Daughter Emma has behavioral issues, multiple child psychology books, increased alcohol purchases coinciding with school calls. Note license plate visible in parking lot, 8GH4721, 2019 Honda Civic, silver. I kept reading, feeling worse with each entry. Robert Chin, 67, apartment 3B Willowbrook Senior Living. Diabetic, possibly undiagnosed dementia, confusion at register increasing, family unaware based on solo shopping pattern. Falls risk, pharmacy purchases suggest recent injury. Next of kin, daughter Lisa Chin, phone number obtained from loyalty card application. The entries went on for pages. Jenny had documented dozens of customers' personal information, health conditions, financial situations, relationship status, and even home addresses. She'd somehow obtained phone numbers, license plate information, and details about family members who didn't even shop at our store. But the truly disturbing part was at the back of the notebook. There was a section titled Priority Monitoring, with about 15 customers flagged for what she called enhanced observation. These included the elderly man from earlier that night, several single women, and families with young children. For these priority customers, Jenny had noted their typical shopping schedules, parking preferences, whether they shopped alone or with family, and even observations about their behavior in the store. One entry read, Susan Williams typically shops Thursdays 7 to 8 p.m., parks near cart return, argues with teenage son, potential family instability, increased wine purchases suggest stress, lives alone during week, ex-husband pickup pattern suggests custody arrangement. My hands were shaking as I closed the notebook and put it back under her register. 20 minutes later, Jenny returned from break, and I had to act normal for the rest of our shift. But I couldn't stop thinking about what I'd seen. The next morning, I called our store manager, David Rodriguez, and asked to speak with him privately. I explained what I'd found, and his expression grew increasingly concerned as I described the notebook's contents. You're saying she's been collecting personal information about customers without their knowledge? He asked. Not just collecting it, I said. She's been building detailed profiles. She knows where they live, what cars they drive, their family situations, health problems, stuff that customers never told her. David immediately pulled Jenny's personnel file and reviewed security footage from previous shifts. What they found was disturbing. Jenny had been photographing customer receipts during transactions, capturing not just purchase information but also partial credit card numbers and personal details from loyalty card applications. She'd been using downtime to search for customers on social media, cross-referencing their faces with their purchase patterns. The security office discovered she'd been accessing the customer database during her shifts, looking up addresses and phone numbers associated with loyalty cards. She'd even been noting which cars belonged to which customers by watching them in the parking lot. When confronted, Jenny claimed she was conducting market research to help the store better serve customers. She insisted she wasn't doing anything wrong, that all the information was publicly available, or already in the system. But her notebook told a different story. The level of detail, the personal observations, the targeting of vulnerable customers. It was clear this went far beyond any legitimate business purpose. Jenny was terminated immediately and escorted from the property. Management contacted the police, who opened an investigation into potential stalking and privacy violations. They discovered she'd been operating similar schemes at her previous jobs, a pattern of using customer service positions to collect personal information. The police investigation revealed that Jenny had been building comprehensive files on over 200 customers across multiple stores where she'd worked. Some of these files contained information going back years, suggesting she'd been tracking people's lives and movements across different locations. Several customers were contacted and informed about the privacy breach. Most were shocked to learn how much personal information had been collected about them without their knowledge. A few admitted they'd noticed Jenny seemed to remember unusual details about their shopping habits, but they'd found it flattering rather than concerning. The incident led to a complete review of our store's privacy policies and employee training procedures. New restrictions were placed on accessing customer databases, and managers began conducting random checks of employee workstations for unauthorized materials. But what really disturbed me was thinking about all the customers who had no idea their privacy had been violated. Jenny had been documenting their personal struggles, family problems, and private information without them knowing. She'd been watching them, learning their routines, building psychological profiles. I started wondering about other retail workers I'd encountered over the years. How many times had I assumed someone was just being friendly or had a good memory, when they were actually collecting information about me? After Jenny was fired, I found myself paying more attention to how other employees interacted with customers. Were they asking too many personal questions? Taking too much interest in purchase patterns? Making notes they shouldn't be making? The whole experience changed how I think about privacy in public spaces. We assume our transactions are anonymous, that cashiers and service workers are just doing their jobs. But Jenny proved how much personal information can be gathered and analyzed by someone with the access and motivation to do it. What scared me most was how long it had been going on. 6 months of detailed surveillance, and none of us, not management, not security, not the customers themselves, had noticed. Jenny had been hiding in plain sight, using her position of trust to violate people's privacy on a massive scale. I've been thinking about this a lot lately, especially when I'm shopping at other stores. How well do we really know the people serving us? And how much attention are they paying to us when we think no one is watching? Let me ask you, have you ever had a store employee who seemed to remember too much about your shopping habits? Someone who made you feel like they were paying more attention to your purchases than they should? What would you do if you discovered someone had been secretly documenting your personal life based on where and what you shop for? Because what happened with Jenny made me realize that our most private moments might not be as private as we think. What I didn't know when I reported Jenny's customer files was that one of her priority monitoring subjects had been watching me just as closely as she'd been watching him. 3 weeks after Jenny was fired, I discovered that being a witness to workplace misconduct had made me a target myself. His name was Carl Brennan, and he'd been shopping at our Walmart for over 2 years. Mid-50s, always polite, usually came in around 10 p.m. during my shift. He bought the same things every week: frozen meals, generic soda, basic toiletries, and a case of Budweiser. Never caused problems, paid in cash, barely made eye contact. The kind of customer you'd describe as completely forgettable. Except Jenny hadn't forgotten him. In her notebook, Carl had been flagged under priority monitoring, with notes about his isolated lifestyle patterns and potential social instability indicators. She documented that he lived alone, had no apparent family contacts, and showed signs of what she called obsessive routine adherence. After Jenny was terminated on November 3, 2023, I figured that was the end of it. The police investigation was ongoing, affected customers had been notified, and new privacy policies were in place. I thought we could all move on. But Carl's behavior started changing immediately after Jenny's termination became store gossip among the overnight crew. The first thing I noticed was how he began timing his visits to coincide exactly with my shifts. Before Jenny's firing, Carl shopped randomly throughout the week. Suddenly, he was showing up every Tuesday and Friday night, right when I was working lanes 12 to 14. He'd walk the store for 30 or 40 minutes, then get in my line specifically, even when other registers had no wait. Initially, I figured it was coincidence. Maybe he'd gotten comfortable with our section of the store. But then he started making small talk during checkout, something he'd never done before. "Working another double shift?" he'd ask, though I wasn't working doubles. "Busy night for you guys," when the store was nearly empty. "Hope management is treating you better these days," with a knowing look. The comments felt off, but I couldn't pinpoint why. Carl wasn't threatening or inappropriate. He was just paying attention in a way that made me uncomfortable. 2 weeks into this pattern, I mentioned it to my supervisor, Amanda Walsh. She suggested I was probably just hyper-aware after the Jenny situation and told me to let her know if Carl's behavior escalated. At the time, I agreed. Maybe I was being paranoid. Then I started noticing Carl in places outside of work. The first time was at the Chevron station on Riverside Drive, where I always got gas after my Thursday shifts. I was filling up my 2017 Toyota Camry around 7:30 a.m. when I saw a dark blue 2015 Ford F-150 pull into the station. Carl got out, made eye contact with me, and nodded like we were old friends before going inside to pay for gas. I told myself it was coincidence. It was a busy gas station near a major intersection. Of course, I'd run into customers there occasionally. But 3 days later, I saw the same blue F-150 in the parking lot at Fairview Shopping Center while I was grocery shopping at the Safeway. I was loading bags into my car when I noticed the truck parked 4 spaces away. Carl was sitting in the driver's seat, apparently reading something on his phone, but I caught him looking in my direction multiple times. That's when I started paying attention to my surroundings more carefully. Over the next week, I spotted Carl's truck in multiple locations where I regularly went: the parking lot at my gym, outside the coffee shop where I met friends on weekends, even in the residential area near my apartment complex on Maple Avenue. Each time, he had plausible reasons to be there: getting gas, shopping, running errands. But the pattern was becoming undeniable. The breaking point came on November 28th, the Tuesday before Thanksgiving. I was working my usual evening shift when Carl came through my line around 11:15 p.m. His purchase was different that night. Instead of his usual groceries, he bought a small notebook, black pens, and a prepaid phone card. As I scanned the items, he leaned closer and said quietly, "I heard about what happened with that cashier who was keeping files on people. Must have been scary, finding out someone was watching customers so closely." My blood went cold. The details about Jenny's notebook hadn't been made public. The only people who knew specifics were management, security, the police, and me. Carl shouldn't have known about the customer files unless. "How do you know about that?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. Carl smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. "Small store, you know. Word gets around. Makes you wonder who else might be paying attention to things they shouldn't be." After he left, I immediately called Amanda and explained what had happened. She reviewed the security footage and confirmed that Carl had indeed purchased those specific items. More concerning, she discovered that Carl had been asking other overnight employees questions about the Jenny situation, trying to get details about the investigation and my role in reporting it. Amanda contacted our district manager and the police. Within 24 hours, we had a security officer review all available footage of Carl's recent visits. What they found was deeply disturbing. The cameras showed Carl deliberately positioning himself to observe my routines. He'd been noting which register I worked, what time I took breaks, when I clocked out, and which exit I used. On several occasions, the footage caught him taking pictures of the employee parking area with his phone, apparently documenting which car was mine. More alarming, security footage from the shopping center across the street showed Carl's truck following my car when I left work on multiple occasions. He'd been tracking my routes home, learning my schedule outside of work, and mapping my regular locations around town. The police investigation revealed that Carl had been conducting surveillance on me for nearly 3 weeks. He'd been using techniques similar to what Jenny had done, but focused on a single target: me. They found pages of handwritten notes in his truck documenting my work schedule, vehicle description, license plate number, and addresses of places I frequently visited. Detective Sarah Collins, who handled the case, explained that Carl appeared to be retaliating against me for reporting Jenny's misconduct. In his mind, I had destroyed someone who was just paying attention to customers, and he wanted to show me what real surveillance felt like. "He was essentially stalking you," Detective Collins told me during an interview. "He developed an obsession with making you feel as watched and documented as the customers in those files." Carl was arrested on charges of stalking and harassment. During the search of his apartment, police found extensive files on several people, not just me, but other Walmart employees, neighbors in his building, and random individuals he'd encountered around town. He'd been building his own version of Jenny's customer profiles, focusing on people's routines and vulnerabilities. The most disturbing discovery was a detailed timeline of my daily activities going back to when Jenny was fired. Carl had been documenting everything: what time I arrived at work, when I took breaks, what I bought during my own shopping trips, who I talked to, where I went after my shifts. He'd been treating my life like a research project. Carl pled guilty to stalking charges and received a restraining order prohibiting him from coming within 500 feet of me or the Walmart where I worked. He was also banned from the store permanently. But the damage was done. For weeks after his arrest, I felt constantly watched. Every customer interaction made me wonder if someone else was collecting information about me. Every routine trip to familiar places had me checking over my shoulder for blue pickup trucks. The experience made me realize how Jenny's privacy violations had created a ripple effect. Her actions hadn't just harmed the customers she'd been documenting, they'd inspired someone else to use similar tactics for retaliation. One privacy violation had led to another, with me caught in the middle. I started thinking about how many people might be watching others without permission. Carl and Jenny had both used their positions and access to gather private information, but regular customers and community members could be doing the same thing. How many people were building mental or physical files on their neighbors, coworkers, or random strangers? The whole situation made me hyper-aware of privacy in ways I'd never considered before. I changed my routines, varied my shopping locations, and became much more cautious about personal information I shared during casual conversations. I started paying attention to whether the same vehicles appeared in multiple locations, whether strangers seemed to know more about me than they should. What bothered me most was that both Jenny and Carl had seemed like completely normal people. Jenny was a model employee, Carl was a quiet, polite customer. Neither of them fit any obvious profile of someone who would violate others' privacy. They'd been hiding their surveillance activities behind facades of normalcy. 6 months later, I still find myself checking my surroundings more carefully than I used to. I notice when the same person appears in multiple locations, when someone asks questions that seem too personal, when customers or coworkers show unusual interest in my schedule or routines. The incident taught me that privacy violations can come from anywhere: coworkers, customers, even people who seem completely harmless. And sometimes, trying to protect other people's privacy can make you a target yourself. But what really scares me is wondering how many other Carl Brennans and Jenny Martinezes are out there, quietly documenting people's lives without anyone knowing. How many of us are being watched by people we consider harmless strangers? Have you ever noticed the same person showing up in multiple places where you go regularly? Someone who seems to know more about your routine than they should. What would you do if you discovered someone had been secretly documenting your daily activities? Because after what happened with Carl, I realized that the people watching us might be closer than we think. What I thought was the end of my surveillance nightmare turned out to be just the beginning. 2 months after Carl's arrest, I discovered that both Jenny's customer profiling and Carl's stalking had actually been part of something much larger, a systematic data collection operation that went all the way up the corporate chain. It started with a seemingly innocent announcement in February 2024. Our district manager, Patricia Williams, called a mandatory meeting for all overnight shift employees. She introduced 2 new corporate consultants, Michael Thompson and Lisa Chin, from something called the Customer Experience Analytics Division. We're implementing a pilot program to better understand shopping patterns and improve customer satisfaction, Patricia explained. Michael and Lisa will be observing operations and gathering data to help optimize our store layout and inventory management. The consultants looked professional enough, matching polo shirts with Walmart corporate logos, tablets and clipboards, official-looking badges. They explained they'd be spending several weeks at our location, documenting customer flow patterns, shopping behaviors, and employee interactions. Initially, it seemed legitimate. Walmart was always running efficiency studies and testing new corporate initiatives. Having consultants observe operations wasn't unusual. But after everything that had happened with Jenny and Carl, I was more alert to people paying unusual attention to customer behavior. The first red flag was how these consultants worked. Instead of focusing on general traffic patterns or inventory turnover like typical corporate studies, Michael and Lisa were documenting individual customers in excessive detail. They'd position themselves near entrances and exits, photographing license plates, noting arrival and departure times, and tracking which specific products people purchased. I watched them operate for several days before approaching my supervisor Amanda about my concerns. She assured me that corporate had approved the study and that all data collection was for legitimate business purposes. But something about their methods reminded me uncomfortably of Jenny's notebook. 2 weeks into the pilot program, I noticed Michael and Lisa weren't just observing customer behavior inside the store. During my breaks, I'd seen them in the parking lot, apparently mapping customer movements between different businesses in the shopping center. They'd been documenting which customers went to other stores before or after visiting Walmart, how long they spent at each location, and even what they carried between stores. The breakthrough came when I recognized one of their subjects. Mrs. Eleanor Martinez was a regular customer, probably in her 70s, who shopped every Wednesday morning. She'd been one of the people in Jenny's priority monitoring files, flagged as elderly, living alone, potentially vulnerable to sales targeting. I'd specifically remembered her case because Jenny had documented her medication purchases and suggested she was dealing with early dementia. On March 12th, I watched Michael photograph Mrs. Martinez's license plate as she arrived, then follow her through the store while pretending to conduct general observations. But he wasn't noting general shopping patterns. He was documenting her specific purchases, how long she spent in each aisle, what products she examined but didn't buy, and how she responded to sale displays. After Mrs. Martinez left, I saw Michael make a phone call and describe her shopping session in detail to whoever was on the other end. He mentioned her name, approximate age, and specific products she'd purchased, including prescription medications she'd picked up at our pharmacy. That evening, I decided to follow up on my suspicions. Using the employee computer system, I looked up recent corporate communications about the Customer Experience Analytics Division. What I found was alarming. There was no record of any official corporate program by that name. No authorization for consultants, no approved data collection study, nothing. I immediately contacted Amanda and shared my findings. She was initially skeptical, but agreed to call the district office for clarification. The response was immediate and concerning. Patricia Williams claimed she'd never authorized any consultants and had no knowledge of a Customer Experience Analytics Division. Within hours, corporate security was at our store investigating. What they discovered was a sophisticated fraud operation that had been running for months across multiple Walmart locations in 3 states. Michael Thompson and Lisa Chin weren't Walmart employees or authorized consultants. They were part of a data brokerage company that had been infiltrating retail locations to collect detailed customer information for sale to marketing firms, insurance companies, and other corporate clients. Their operation was remarkably sophisticated. They'd created fake corporate identities, produced convincing identification materials, and developed a systematic approach to gaining access to retail locations. They'd been targeting stores that had recently experienced security incidents, like our situation with Jenny, betting that management would be focused on internal threats rather than external ones. The security investigation revealed that Michael and Lisa had been collecting far more than shopping data. They'd been photographing customers' faces, documenting license plates, recording personal conversations, and even tracking customers to their homes and workplaces to build comprehensive lifestyle profiles. Their real names were David Parker and Michelle Wong, and they worked for a company called Integrated Consumer Analytics, a data broker that sold detailed personal profiles to anyone willing to pay. Their clients included insurance companies looking to adjust rates based on shopping habits, marketing firms targeting vulnerable populations, and even private investigators gathering information for divorce cases and custody disputes. The most disturbing discovery was how they'd been using information from previous incidents to enhance their data collection. They'd somehow obtained copies of Jenny's customer files and were using her profiles as starting points for their own surveillance. They knew which customers had been flagged as vulnerable, which ones had privacy concerns, and which ones were unlikely to notice additional scrutiny. Corporate security found evidence that Parker and Wong had been operating at over 30 Walmart locations across California, Arizona, and Nevada. They'd been systematically collecting data on thousands of customers, building detailed profiles that included shopping habits, health information, financial status, family relationships, and personal vulnerabilities. Their clients were paying premium prices for what they called enhanced consumer intelligence. Insurance companies were using the data to identify customers with health issues who might be concealing medical conditions. Marketing firms were targeting elderly customers with predatory sales tactics based on cognitive decline indicators. Debt collection agencies were using shopping patterns to locate people who were avoiding them. The FBI became involved when investigators discovered that Parker and Wong had been selling customer data to companies that specifically targeted vulnerable populations, elderly individuals with dementia, single parents struggling financially, and people dealing with addiction or mental health issues. Federal agents found that their operation had generated over $2.3 million in revenue from selling customer profiles. They'd been operating for nearly 4 years, moving from location to location, using fake credentials and corporate identities to gain access to retail environments. During the FBI investigation, I learned that our store had been specifically targeted because of the Jenny Martinez incident. Parker and Wong had researched recent privacy violations at retail locations, identifying stores where management might be distracted by internal investigations. They'd calculated that employees and managers dealing with one privacy breach would be less likely to notice another form of surveillance. The federal case revealed connections to similar operations at other major retailers. Target, Home Depot, and several grocery chains had been infiltrated by related data collection schemes. The problem was much larger than anyone had realized: an entire industry of unauthorized consumer surveillance operating inside legitimate retail environments. Parker and Wong were arrested on federal charges including wire fraud, identity theft, and violations of privacy laws. Their company, Integrated Consumer Analytics, was shut down, and its client list became evidence in ongoing investigations of corporate privacy violations. But the damage was already done. Thousands of customers had been unknowingly surveilled and profiled. Their personal information, shopping habits, health data, and family details had been sold to companies that used the information to discriminate against them or exploit their vulnerabilities. The investigation also revealed how the different privacy violations were connected. Jenny's customer files had inspired Carl's stalking behavior, which had made me hypervigilant about surveillance, which led me to notice Parker and Wong's operation. Each incident had created conditions that enabled the next one. What scared me most was realizing how easy it had been for professional data thieves to infiltrate our workplace. They presented themselves as legitimate corporate consultants, and we'd given them access to everything: customer information, employee schedules, security procedures, and unlimited observation opportunities. The whole experience made me understand that privacy violations aren't isolated incidents. They're part of larger systems where personal information gets collected, shared, sold, and used in ways that consumers never authorize or even know about. After the arrests, I started paying attention to other people who claimed to be conducting studies or observations in retail environments. How many times had I seen someone with a clipboard or tablet documenting customer behavior and assumed they were legitimate? How many corporate consultants, mystery shoppers, or researchers were actually unauthorized data collectors? The federal investigation is still ongoing, but it's already uncovered a massive network of companies that specialize in covert consumer surveillance. They operate in shopping centers, grocery stores, pharmacies, and other retail environments, collecting data that gets sold to anyone willing to pay for detailed personal profiles. I can't help wondering how many other operations like this are currently running. How many people with official-looking badges and corporate explanations are actually collecting our personal information without permission? How much of our private lives is being documented, analyzed, and sold while we go about our normal daily routines? Have you ever noticed people in stores who seem to be documenting customer behavior in unusual detail? Someone with a clipboard or tablet who claimed to be conducting research? What if they weren't who they said they were? Because what I learned from this whole experience is that our privacy can be violated by organized criminals just as easily as by individual employees or customers. And sometimes, the people we trust to protect us from privacy violations are the ones enabling even worse ones. The federal investigation into Parker and Wong's data operation should have been the end of our store's surveillance nightmare. But what FBI agents discovered while reviewing security footage for their case exposed something that made everything else look like amateur hour. Our own management had been conducting illegal surveillance on employees for over 2 years. It started when Special Agent Rebecca Torres requested access to our store's complete security system for evidence in the federal case. She needed to verify Parker and Wong's movements and identify all the customers they'd been photographing. But when our district manager Patricia Williams tried to provide the footage, she discovered security recordings that shouldn't have existed. Our official security system consisted of standard retail cameras, entrance/exit monitoring, cash register coverage, and anti-theft surveillance in high-value areas. What Agent Torres found was a completely separate recording system that had been documenting employee areas, break rooms, and management offices where customers never went. The discovery came to light on March 28, 2024, when Agent Torres asked me to review footage from my shifts to identify when Parker and Wong had been observing my register. I was sitting in the security office with Patricia and our store manager, Robert Kim, when Torres pulled up recordings from February 15. "These camera angles don't match your official security layout," Torres said, pointing to footage that showed the employee break room from multiple angles. "Who authorized surveillance of employee areas?" Patricia and Robert exchanged looks that immediately set off my alarm bells. After everything we'd been through, I'd learned to recognize when people were hiding something. "We'll need to check with corporate about additional security measures," Robert said, but Agent Torres wasn't buying it. "This footage is tagged with a different system identifier than your main security network," she explained. "Someone installed unauthorized surveillance equipment specifically to monitor employee activities." That's when Patricia broke down and admitted what had been happening. For the past 2 years, our store manager Robert Kim had been running a covert surveillance operation targeting his own employees. He'd installed hidden cameras and recording devices throughout employee areas, break rooms, storage areas, office spaces, even the parking section where employees left their personal belongings during shifts. The operation had started, according to Patricia, as a way to investigate employee theft and productivity issues. But it had expanded into comprehensive surveillance of everything employees did while at work, including private conversations, personal phone calls, and interactions with customers that management wanted to analyze. Robert had converted a storage room behind the main office into what he called his monitoring station. He'd installed multiple computer screens connected to the unauthorized camera system, along with audio recording equipment that captured conversations throughout employee areas. Agent Torres immediately secured the monitoring room as evidence for a new federal investigation. What she found inside was disturbing: thousands of hours of recorded footage and audio documenting employee activities, along with detailed files on individual workers. Robert had been building profiles on every employee, similar to what Jenny had done with customers. He'd been documenting personal conversations, family problems, financial difficulties, relationship issues, and health concerns that employees discussed during breaks or private moments. The files were extensive and invasive. My own file contained recordings of private phone calls I'd made during breaks, conversations with coworkers about personal problems, and even documentation of my bathroom break patterns and how long I spent away from my register. But the most disturbing discovery was how Robert had been using this information. He'd been making employment decisions based on employees' private lives, denying promotions to people with relationship problems, adjusting schedules to punish employees who complained about working conditions, and even sharing personal information with other managers to influence their treatment of specific workers. Agent Torres found evidence that Robert had been selling access to employee surveillance data to the same types of companies that had been buying customer information from Parker and Wong. Insurance companies were using the data to investigate workers' compensation claims, looking for evidence that employees were faking injuries or disabilities. Background check companies were purchasing recordings of employees discussing past legal troubles, financial problems, or personal issues that weren't part of their official employment records. Some of Robert's clients were even private investigators working divorce cases, gathering evidence about employees' personal relationships and family situations. The federal investigation revealed that Robert had been operating this surveillance system since January 2022, shortly after he was promoted to store manager. He'd used his access to authorize fake security upgrades, and had installed the unauthorized equipment during overnight maintenance periods when only minimal staff were present. Robert had been particularly targeting employees who showed signs of what he considered security risks, people with financial problems, relationship troubles, or family issues that might make them more likely to steal or violate company policies. He'd been using their private conversations to build cases against them, documenting everything they said about work stress, management complaints, or personal struggles. The surveillance had affected dozens of employees over 2 years. Robert had recordings of workers discussing medical conditions they hadn't disclosed to HR, financial difficulties they were trying to keep private, family problems that could affect their job performance, and personal relationships that were none of his business. What made it worse was that Robert had been sharing this information with other managers and corporate supervisors, using employees' private struggles against them in performance reviews and disciplinary actions. People had been denied promotions, given poor schedules, or subjected to additional scrutiny because of things they'd said in private conversations that Robert had illegally recorded. The FBI discovered that Robert's operation was part of a larger network of retail managers who had been conducting unauthorized employee surveillance across multiple states. They'd been sharing techniques for installing hidden recording equipment and selling access to employee data through the same brokers who handled customer information. During the investigation, I learned that several employment decisions that had affected me directly were based on Robert's illegal surveillance. My request for schedule changes had been denied because Robert had recordings of me complaining about management during private conversations with coworkers. A promotion opportunity had gone to someone else partly because Robert had documented my personal phone calls about family stress. The discovery explained several incidents that had seemed strange at the time. Robert had made comments that suggested he knew details about employees' personal lives that we never shared with management. He'd scheduled difficult shifts for people right after they'd discussed personal problems in the break room. He'd been using our private conversations to manipulate work assignments and create additional stress for targeted employees. Robert was arrested on federal charges including illegal surveillance, privacy violations, and wire fraud. The investigation revealed he generated over $180,000 in revenue from selling employee surveillance data over 2 years. The case also exposed similar operations at retail locations across the country. Target, Best Buy, and several other major chains had managers who were conducting unauthorized surveillance of their own employees, creating a black market for worker surveillance data that paralleled the customer information trade. Walmart Corporate faced massive liability for Robert's actions, leading to settlements with affected employees and implementation of new oversight procedures for store-level management. But the damage to employee privacy had already been done. Years of private conversations, personal information, and family details had been recorded, analyzed, and sold without anyone's knowledge or consent. The whole experience made me realize how vulnerable employees are to surveillance by their own management. We trust our employers with access to our workplaces, our schedules, and our professional activities, but that access can be abused in ways we never imagined. What disturbed me most was understanding how all these privacy violations were connected. Jenny's customer profiling had created conditions that attracted Parker and Wong's data operation, which led to the FBI investigation that exposed Robert's employee surveillance. Each violation had enabled others, creating a cycle where privacy became less and less protected. The federal cases are still proceeding, but they've already revealed a massive underground economy based on unauthorized surveillance of both customers and employees in retail environments. People's most private moments are being recorded, analyzed, and sold while they think they're just shopping or working. After everything that happened, I transferred to a different store and eventually left retail entirely. I couldn't continue working in an environment where I knew surveillance could be happening at any level, from coworkers documenting customers, to customers stalking employees, to organized criminals infiltrating stores, to management illegally recording their own workers. The experience taught me that privacy violations can come from anywhere and anyone. The people we trust most, employers, coworkers, regular customers, authorized consultants, can all be engaged in surveillance activities that we never suspect. What scares me is thinking about how many other workplaces might have similar surveillance operations running right now. How many managers are illegally recording their employees? How many companies are selling worker surveillance data? How many people's private conversations and personal struggles are being documented without their knowledge? Have you ever had a manager who seemed to know too much about your personal life? Someone who made comments suggesting they'd overheard private conversations? What would you do if you discovered your employer had been secretly recording everything you said and did at work? Because what I learned from this whole nightmare is that the people with the most power to violate our privacy are often the ones we're least likely to suspect. And once surveillance systems are in place, There's no limit to how they can be abused or who might gain access to the information they collect. The surveillance never really ends, it just gets passed from one violator to the next, with our most private moments becoming data points in systems we never knew existed. After everything that had happened at my old Walmart, the customer profiling, the stalking, the data theft operation, and the illegal management surveillance, I thought I was done with retail horror stories. I transferred to a different store across town, then eventually quit retail altogether for an office job. But 6 months later, when I started shopping at the Walmart on Commerce Boulevard in Stockton, I discovered that surveillance and intimidation could follow you anywhere, even as an ordinary customer. It started innocently enough in September 2024. I needed basic household supplies and groceries, and the Commerce Boulevard Walmart was convenient to my new apartment on Sycamore Road. I'd shop there once or twice a week, usually in the evenings after work, trying to blend in as just another anonymous customer. For the first few weeks, everything seemed normal. The store was busy but well managed, employees were professional, and I felt relieved to be on the customer side of retail transactions instead of dealing with workplace surveillance. I thought I'd finally escaped the nightmare of being constantly watched and documented. The first message appeared on October 8th, tucked under my windshield wiper when I returned to my 2018 Nissan Altima in the parking lot after a routine shopping trip. It was a small piece of paper, folded in half, with a handwritten note. "You bought $47.83 worth of groceries tonight. Interesting choices for someone living alone." I stood there staring at the message, my heart racing. The amount was exactly what I'd spent, down to the cent. Someone had been watching my transaction closely enough to document the precise total, and they knew I lived alone, information I'd never shared with anyone at the store. My first thought was that this was related to the surveillance incidents at my previous workplace. Maybe Carl had violated his restraining order, or someone connected to the federal investigations was targeting me. But Carl was in a different county, and this felt different from his stalking pattern. I called the Stockton police and reported the incident. Officer Maria Santos took the report but explained that a single anonymous note wasn't enough for criminal charges, especially since it didn't contain explicit threats. She suggested I report any additional incidents and be aware of my surroundings. 2 weeks later, the second message appeared. This time it was tucked into my shopping cart when I returned from getting milk from the dairy section. The note read, "You seem stressed lately. Your shopping patterns suggest financial concerns. Maybe you should reconsider some of your choices." This message was more disturbing because it suggested ongoing surveillance. Someone was tracking my shopping habits over time, analyzing my purchases for personal information, and making judgments about my financial situation. It felt exactly like what Jenny Martinez had been doing with her customer profiles, but this person was communicating directly with me. I immediately went to customer service and asked to speak with management. The assistant manager, Kevin Rodriguez, reviewed security footage but couldn't identify anyone placing notes in my cart. The cameras had blind spots in certain aisles, and whoever was doing this knew how to avoid being recorded. Kevin suggested I vary my shopping times and report any additional incidents. He also offered to have security keep an eye out for suspicious behavior, but with hundreds of customers daily, monitoring everyone wasn't practical. The third message appeared a week later, slipped into my grocery bag while I was distracted during checkout. I didn't find it until I was unpacking at home. "You talked to management about me. That wasn't smart. I know more about you than you think." This message crossed the line from creepy observation to direct intimidation. Someone was escalating their behavior, making it clear they were aware of my attempts to stop them and threatening consequences for seeking help. I returned to the store the next day and insisted on speaking with the store manager, Dorothy Chin. I showed her all 3 messages and explained my concerns about employee surveillance based on my previous experiences. Dorothy took the situation seriously and promised a full investigation. What Dorothy discovered through internal investigation was deeply disturbing. One of their overnight stalkers, Marcus Webb, had been using his access to the store's customer database to research shoppers who caught his attention. He'd been identifying customers who seemed vulnerable, people shopping alone, those making purchases that suggested personal or financial problems, individuals who appeared isolated or stressed. Marcus had been building his own version of customer profiles, similar to what Jenny had done at my previous store. But instead of just collecting information, he'd been using it to intimidate selected customers through anonymous messages designed to make them feel watched and analyzed. The investigation revealed that Marcus had been operating this intimidation scheme for over 8 months, targeting approximately 30 customers with anonymous notes. He'd been using his employee access to look up receipt information, loyalty card data, and even security footage to gather personal details about his targets. Marcus had developed a psychological profile system for identifying customers he considered good targets for intimidation. He focused on people who shopped alone regularly, made purchases suggesting they were dealing with stress or financial difficulties, or showed signs of what he called social isolation indicators. His messages were calculated to make customers feel exposed and vulnerable. He'd reference specific purchase amounts, shopping times, or personal details that customers assumed were private. The goal was to create a sense that someone was constantly watching and judging their choices. Dorothy found that Marcus had been keeping detailed files on his targets, similar to the customer profiles Jenny and the corporate data thieves had created. He documented shopping patterns, estimated income levels, relationship status, health indicators based on purchases, and psychological vulnerabilities that could be exploited through intimidation. The most disturbing discovery was that Marcus had been coordinating with similar employees at other retail locations. He was part of an informal network of workers who shared techniques for intimidating customers and creating psychological distress. They called it customer education, teaching people to be more aware of how much personal information their shopping habits revealed. This network had been operating across multiple Walmart locations in Central California, with employees sharing target information and escalation techniques. They'd developed a system for identifying customers who were unlikely to report harassment, focusing on people who seemed isolated, stressed, or dealing with personal problems. Marcus and his associates had been particularly targeting customers who showed signs of mental health issues, financial stress, or social isolation. They'd been using anonymous messages to worsen these conditions, apparently believing they were providing some kind of public service by making people more security conscious. The investigation revealed that Marcus had escalated beyond anonymous notes with several customers. He'd been making anonymous phone calls, sending messages to people's workplaces, and even following some targets to their homes to leave intimidating notes in their mailboxes. Marcus was terminated immediately and arrested on charges of stalking, harassment, and computer fraud for unauthorized access to customer data. Police investigation expanded to include other employees in the harassment network, leading to arrests at multiple retail locations. The criminal investigation revealed that this employee intimidation network had been targeting hundreds of customers across a dozen stores. They'd been sharing personal information about customers between locations, coordinating harassment campaigns, and escalating intimidation tactics based on how targets responded to initial messages. FBI involvement expanded the investigation into a federal case when agents discovered connections between the employee harassment network and the customer data theft operations from my previous store. Some of the same companies that had been buying customer profiles were also purchasing behavioral modification data from the intimidation network. The revelation that emerged was that Marcus and his associates were essentially running psychological experiments on unwitting customers. They were documenting how people responded to different types of intimidation, which messages were most effective at changing shopping behavior, and how to identify customers who were most vulnerable to harassment. This data was being sold to marketing companies that wanted to understand how to manipulate customer behavior through targeted anxiety and social pressure. Insurance companies were using the information to identify customers who might be susceptible to pressure tactics. Debt collection agencies were purchasing profiles of people who could be intimidated into paying debts faster. The federal case revealed a disturbing trend in retail environments where employees were being recruited or incentivized to psychologically manipulate customers for corporate profit. The harassment wasn't random, it was a systematic data collection operation disguised as individual employee misconduct. Marcus pled guilty to federal charges and received 3 years in prison plus restitution to affected customers. The broader investigation led to arrests of 12 employees across 7 retail locations and the shutdown of 2 companies that had been purchasing intimidation data. But the psychological damage was already done. Dozens of customers had been subjected to months of targeted harassment designed to make them feel constantly watched and judged. Many had changed their shopping habits, avoided certain stores, or developed anxiety about routine errands. The experience taught me that privacy violations and surveillance can evolve into active harassment and intimidation. It's not enough for criminals to just watch and document. Some of them want to make their targets aware of being watched, using that awareness as a weapon to create fear and control behavior. What scared me most was realizing how all these different types of retail surveillance were connected. Customer profiling led to data theft, which created conditions for employee surveillance, which evolved into customer intimidation. Each violation made the next one easier and more sophisticated. After Marcus's arrest, I understood that retail environments had become testing grounds for surveillance and manipulation techniques that were being developed and refined for much larger applications. The methods being used against individual customers were prototypes for broader social control systems. I stopped shopping at that Walmart, and now do most of my purchasing online or at small local businesses where individual employees don't have access to sophisticated customer databases. But I know that doesn't really solve the problem, it just moves it to different platforms and environments. The whole experience made me realize that being a customer doesn't protect you from surveillance and harassment. The same technologies and techniques being used to exploit workers can just as easily be turned against consumers. And the people implementing these systems often seem completely normal, trusted employees who appear to be just doing their jobs. What bothers me most is wondering how many other retail employees are currently engaged in similar harassment networks. How many customers are receiving anonymous messages, being stalked through stores, or having their personal information shared among workers who want to manipulate their behavior? Have you ever received mysterious notes or messages that seem to reference your shopping habits or personal life? Ever felt like store employees were paying unusual attention to your purchases or behavior? What would you do if you discovered that retail workers were systematically intimidating customers as part of a larger data collection operation? Because what I learned from this entire nightmare is that surveillance, intimidation, and harassment have become systematized business operations. And the only way they can continue operating is if customers assume that the people serving them are trustworthy and that anonymous harassment is just random bad luck rather than organized criminal activity. The surveillance never stops, it just finds new ways to make us aware that we're being watched, turning that awareness into a tool for control and manipulation. Thanks so much for watching. I can't express enough how much your support means. The likes, the comments, it all really helps the channel grow. If you enjoyed the video, make sure to hit that like button and share your thoughts in the comments below. I always take the time to read them. And don't forget to subscribe so you never miss out on any new videos. See you next time.